Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I have a feeling that there could be more people that drift in, but given the limited amount of time, I think we need to actually get started with the presentation. So let me give you just a quick overview of this session. The session is Positive Behavior Supports and Intervention, Supports for High School. For those of you that heard Alexa, I thank Alexa for giving a little advanced organizer on PBIS for us, and you'll actually see the triangle she showed in Lucille's presentation. We plan to take two breaks for some table talk during the session, so you have a chance to talk to a little bit to your colleagues at your table. And in addition, we have at the end, you're going to hear from a couple principals that are actually making this happen, which I think people will really look forward to hearing. But let me take, the other thing I wanted to also make, Alexa's slide kind of did this. On their slide, she had the PBS on the right and RTI on the left. And so I'm going to make a little bit of a connection as well, is today we're doing the kind of PBS side of it, and then tomorrow afternoon, we're actually doing RTI that's focused more on academic outcomes. So for those of you that are interested in RTI, you'll be able to get some exposure to both sides of that triangle. So let me quickly introduce today's panel. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Everybody's bio is in your program, so if you are curious about these people and you want to know more about them, you'll find it there. Lucille Eber, who will speak first today, is the statewide director of the Illinois PBIS network. I've known Lucille for a lot of years. I don't dare say how long because it would give you an idea about age, since we didn't go to elementary school together. But the very few things I'm going to say about Lucille in this morning's session, they talked about commitment, courage, and will. And this is a lady who displays all three of those in the work that she does. And I think that will be evident when you hear from Lucille. In addition, we have Amy Flammini, who is the Technical Assistance Director for the Illinois PBIS network. And then our two principals are Larry Irvin, who's the principal of the Edwin G. Foreman High School in Chicago, and Dave Smiley, who's the principal of Elgin High School in Elgin, Illinois. I got bad news about both of them that I've heard just now. They're both retiring this year, which is, well, who retires these days? I mean, they're leaving their current jobs. But the one thing that will be interesting, I was thinking about this as I was reading about, because I knew that Dave Smiley was retiring. I just heard about Larry. Is it's going to be an interesting opportunity to look at how well we can sustain these innovations when you have turnover in principal leadership, which I think is actually one of the challenges I think that we have in the work that we do. So without any further ado, let me turn this over to Lucille.
Thank you, Lou. Appreciate that nice intro. My husband would say what he means is I'm really bossy. That would be the nicer way. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the Midwest if you're from Chicago, if you're not from Chicago. And I think Larry is taking a new job rather than retiring, so I probably misspoke because, whereas I think Dave is looking forward to not taking a new job. After 36 years in the school system here in Illinois. Today, what I'm going to do up front is give you kind of a quick overview of the application of positive behavior interventions and supports. And Amy's going to then zero in a little bit more on high schools, how it's different for high schools. I'll give you the big picture. We've been at it for a while here in Illinois. And as Lou said, this is a response to intervention model. A lot of our information is our support, our learning, is from the National PBIS Center that is funded through OSEP. Rob Horner and George Sagai are the leaders, the helpers. Rob was just in Illinois last week, And I continue after 13 years to learn something from him. Every time he opens his mouth, he teaches us something. So a lot of the work that we've done here in Illinois and in other states is due to the support of the center. The RTI model, a couple things about Lou's comments with response to intervention. PBIS is a response to intervention model, but it's actually been around longer than the words response to intervention. So there's kind of a semantic issue in that people think that RTI, response to intervention, is only about academics, and that there's RTI and that there's PBIS. But it's actually RTI, and PBIS is the behavioral application. But we've been doing PBIS here in Illinois for 14 years now, and the words RTI didn't hit the world in the manner that they are now until, what, maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago? So PBIS has actually been a behavioral application of RTI that's been around for a long time. This is what we call Triangle version 347.65, I don't know. But it's our latest and greatest favorite one because what it reiterates is that the application of teaching behavior, supporting behavior as an active curriculum area and social climate in the school is for all kids. And if you're familiar with multi-tiered models in the triangle, the green represents what every kid should get. And there's been a misnomer out there that universal, what every kid gets, only works for 80 to 90% of the kids, so that means only 80 to 90% of the kids get it. And the correction on that is everybody gets it, but some kids need added support in order for it to be effective. So in the model, what we look at is changing the universal curriculum, represented by all green, and using research-based behavioral approaches that used to be only used in special education, using them in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in every classroom, all the adults trained in research-based behavioral approaches, and all the adults expected to use them everywhere, every day. And the next part of the triangle, or what we call Tier 2, means there's an additional dosage of research-based behavioral approaches that some kids need. I'll give you an example in a moment. And it's not completely different than what happens to kids every day in school. And then some kids need an added dosage on top of that. So that what we like about this triangle is showing that it's scaling up and adding on. So I'm going to use an academic analogy to try to create the understanding. We know that in universal, let's just take literacy approaches. There are research-based ways to teach kids to read and to improve reading skills. And some kids need addition on top of that. And then some kids need the same research-based approaches, but in highly individualized dosage and in highly individualized manner. It's not like all kids get this and then other kids get something completely different. However, when you do this with behavior, and this next triangle that I'm going to show you shows probably what Alexa showed you in her session, which is RTI, behavior on one side, academics on the other side. The behavioral piece I'm going to try to summarize for you quickly. But before I do that, what's different is, I like academic analogies, but what's different is not all the teachers in your high schools came out of college knowing they were going to be expected to teach behavior. They came out of college, if they're like my husband, who teaches in a Chicago public high school, he came out of college and then a doctoral program as a music teacher. And he's trained to teach music. But now the world has shifted, the world has changed. And we recognize you can't teach reading, English, science, or music if you don't have engaged learners, and if you don't have a positive social climate, and if you don't have good behavioral support structures, we lose the ability to engage learners. So you see, when we install, I borrow that word from Dean Fixon in his Scaling Up Science, when you install PBIS, we have to recognize that it is a very vast difference than what teachers thought they were going to be doing, especially at high school. Because high school is more content-oriented, as you well know, in teacher prep and in organizational structure than even in elementary schools. So as I described the behavioral approach to you, we know that it can be more challenging in high school, but it doesn't mean that it isn't needed and it doesn't work the same way. So at the school-wide level, this is how it looks real quickly in the building. The school-wide level, all the adults are trained and supported to actually teach behavior every day. And we do that through a framework where the team in the building comes up with 3 to 5 common behavioral expectations that become the mantra of the buildings. Common ones are respect, responsibility, safety. As we get into high schools, people do stuff about being engaged, be there, be ready, things like that. They're the mantra of the school. And behavioral expectations are then defined in different settings. How you show respect in the cafeteria is different than in the computer lab, different than in the library, and it's all defined through a behavioral matrix, and it's actively taught and monitored. The teaching of behavior as part of the adult's job and clarifying the expectations is very solid, has solid research behind it. However, it used to only be applied once kids had problems. Now it's being applied in the whole school. So the research is pretty clear. If you want high rates of prosocial behavior, you actually have to clarify expectations, teach it, and the adults, here's the hard part, have to model it and have to demonstrate it and have to encourage it. So you know the old days when somebody would walk past a teacher's classroom and hear somebody say something like, "Oh, I see you're back," after a suspension. "We'll see how long that lasts." See, that would be considered disrespectful and against research-based strategies. Research-based strategies say we model and demonstrate and encourage and promote positive behavior by our positive interactions with kids. So there's actually different expectations for how teachers communicate with kids, and that changes the administrator's role in the building, which is to ensure this social climate happens. So that's kind of a simple explanation. What happens for data-based decision-making is that there's a team that constantly looks at the data and decides where to zero in with very focused teaching techniques. The common place to start in high schools is with the behavior called on time to class, fondly known as the opposite of tardies, right? And it's the first way kids disengage in high schools is by not showing up on time and then not showing up at all. The example here is, first of all the adults have to be on the same page about the behavior we want, and we have to define on time to class in a way that all the adults come to a conclusion of what it is. You can't have one teacher say, if you're in the room it counts, and another teacher say you got to have your rear end in the chair before I throw you out. And then teacher C would be, on Monday, you got to be in your chair. On Tuesday, you got to be in the room, and by Friday, I go out in the hall and haul you in. And all that does is let the kids know there are no rules. So that's the example, is the adults have to come to agreement on the behavioral expectation, teach it in a proactive way, promote it, reinforce it, encourage it. And if you want to shift in a data point, you have to invest heavily for a while to get that shift, because the shaped behavior is it doesn't matter when I get to class. So we have to really teach the new one at a high rate for X number of weeks, and then we move into more intermittent teaching and more intermittent reinforcement. In other words, there's a plan. It follows the science. You check the data. You see if it changes. You adjust the teaching. So all that takes some training and some implementation. At Tier 2, what we know is after you've up the ante and all the kids are on time, at Tier 2 there will be some kids who need a little bit more, and they're going to need a connection with an adult perhaps every period to get reinforced for being on time. So we set up things like that. Other kids have deeper issues about why they're not coming to class on time, and they may need an individualized behavior plan where we figure out why they're not coming to class and change something about their day, their life, to promote them getting to class. But you don't want to do that individual stuff till you clean up the larger data points at Tier 1. That's response to intervention, and that's starting at Tier 1, but moving forward and getting kids into higher level interventions who need it. It's kind of a quick explanation, but I'm assuming that there's probably some knowledge here about that. This triangle turned upside down is slightly blasphemous, and I kind of like that. I kind of come from the world of Tier 2, Tier 3, having spent a lot of my career prior to the past 15 years working with kids with significant mental health and emotional and behavior problems. And the only reason we turn it upside down is to show you that Tier 2, Tier 3, although it only affects about 10 to 15% of the school, there's a whole range of interventions that need to be readily available in your system. In my husband's high school, which will remain unnamed, okay, there is no Tier 2, Tier 3. There's, you get in trouble, you get in trouble, and somehow then the kid no longer is there or goes to special ed. And so with Tier 2, Tier 3, we're moving quicker with lower level support structures rapidly, and somebody like my husband doesn't have to figure out how to get a kid an intervention. They get caught in the data. Where somebody's checking that data, who's not coming to class, and not waiting until they flunked the course before an intervention kicks in. The system reviews the data, finds the kids, installs the intervention. And you know, the teachers then know how to get access to intervention. So there's check-in, check-out, there's a check-in connect mentoring system. There's some kids that need small group interventions, more practice about problem-solving skills, anger management. Plenty of adults need practice on anger management, problem-solving skills. So we move from delivered to all, to delivered to groups, to delivered to smaller groups, to delivered in a highly individualized manner, and we move the kids through rapidly. It's really a challenge to put these Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports in place in high schools, but we're doing it. Just to give you a context, in Illinois, we have about 1,400 schools implementing this, and we have about 342 coaches. Coaches are critical to troubleshoot the support of the system. This is our number of high schools, so we're at about 10% of our schools are high schools, and we're in about 30% of the high schools in Illinois. Most of these high schools, as you can see, have come on in the past 2 to 3 years. The high schools, you know, are finally getting the message that they also have to do response to intervention and put intervention systems in place. But they have come on slower than the other schools. But they're coming on so fast now, it's scaring us, quite frankly, because the demand now is so high. And you know, our support structure to help them is always scaring me. This is an example of the type of an effect and the type of the data. So I'll show you some of that really quickly. But basically we look at, this is office discipline referrals per 100 kid per day. And there's an online data system. If you're not familiar with it, go to swiss.org, SWIS.org, and you can see a demo of a data system that helps people break down the data for quick and easy use at the building level. It's a big issue to install useful data systems in high schools. High schools have a lot of data, but it's not being used. And so to put it into a useful format where you could pull this up any day and see how things are going. So this is a high school that's comparing their first semester 2 years in a row before they implemented to when they started implementing. They would share this with the faculty and say, look, we're only one semester in, but we've already dropped our office discipline referrals per 100 kid from 0.81 per day to 0.57, you know. And then you can equate that to how many kids, you can equate it to how many hours paid back. This is that same high school doing that instructional time paid back, right, with out-of-school suspensions. So they've actually gained back instructional days by reducing their out-of-school suspensions. This is an example of how you dialogue about the data. This is academic test scores. They were feeling like that getting their kids not suspended so much could already have an impact on their academic data. This is to remind me to tell you that we measure fidelity, which is an important part of an evidence-based intervention. So after people are trained, the school-wide evaluation tool, is an example of how the school gets a measurement. Are you really implementing it? So what we want to see is fidelity go up, meaning you're implementing it better. And what we see is as the fidelity goes up, the problem behavior goes down even further. You can get a little bit of an effect with a little bit of implementation. If you want a lot of effect, you got to go for full implementation. So that's part of the implementation. This is a subscale of the set, and it's expectations taught. It's a hot one in the high schools because the teachers are not used to teaching behavior. And that's quite a significant social culture shift for teachers to realize it's my job to say, what does respect look like in the hallway, instead of just stop that. Cut it out isn't teaching. What does respect look like? Show me how you would be respectful. And then the kids actually saying that to each other has become very prominent in our bully prevention applications, where kids are free to say to each other, that's not respectful. Treat me with respect. So there's a lot of carryover with the language. This is, I called this the journey to full implementation, showing how high schools struggle in the beginning with their fidelity and getting the expectations taught, but they can actually measure when their fidelity improves, and this is their ODRs going down. over several years. This is some of our demonstration high schools. It's slow, but it moves. And the higher the fidelity, the better the rate. This is a little story that is on our PowerPoint on your website, but here's the picture. And I wanted to mention this because this particular high school decided disproportionality by ethnicity was an issue for them. And so they brought culturally responsive techniques into their PBIS implementation with the goal of reducing exclusionary discipline reactions for their kids. In this case, it was Latino Hispanic males, and they got the effect. That's just to show you the group decides where they want to spend their energy and how to get the effect that they have. So we wanted you to just take a moment at your table, and if you'd like to write down a question, there's cards there. But before we move on to how we train the high schools differently and hear from the principals, the question for you at your table is, what does the discipline system currently look like in your school, and how is it working? So we wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect and dialogue for just about 3 or 4 minutes, and then someone will come around and grab any questions you might have on a card. Okay, so we're going to keep moving here, but let me check in and see, does anybody have any particular questions you want to ask? We're a fairly small group. Can raise your hand? Okay, yes, thank you. The culturally responsive practices, if you go on to our website, PBISillinois.org, number one, we have a technical assistance brief on some schools that have worked with some culturally responsive practices. In this particular school, and this is in our newsletter on our website, what they did in this particular school was they had presentations by speakers informing the staff. This is a big one that I've seen in the literature with Russ Skiba's work and others from the center, informing staff on what cultural values and life experiences of kids are, and also people often adjust their language with their behavioral matrix, and one of the ways to get culturally responsive curriculum with your behavior is to make sure that your leadership teams have people on it who are of the culture of your children, even if you have to go into the community and haul them in, okay, as family members in communities. So in a lot of professional development, and in some places they've moved into some of those practices, white privilege, you may have heard of that type of training, giving people the experience of what it feels like to be of a minority. So we're exploring all kinds of different things. Restorative justice practices have helped with cultural responsiveness in terms of people opening the dialogue. We are also exploring that. Good question. Other questions at this point? Yes, sir. The change in the social climate. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Amy and the principals to follow up on this, but I'm going to make a few comments as we do that, okay? Staff engagement is one of the key issues because this is not about the kids. This positive behavior supports is about the adults, and it's about changing the adult behavior. So, you know, I'm getting a little impatient, and maybe I'm just getting old and cranky, I don't know, but there's a couple things. We do work with engagement, we show data, we help teachers experience greater competency and confidence by using different practices. So that's always your best bet, is use the data, show them a reason to need to change, help them see that they can become more confident and competent. But I also feel that as leaders, as administrators, we have to let people know what's not okay. And, you know, we have reached the point that the research is clear enough on behavioral practices, just like with literacy practices, that an adult who works in a public school should not be able to say, I don't want to use research-based practices around behavior. I mean, think if somebody said, I don't want to give direct instruction of literacy, then the answer would be, then go work somewhere else, right? So I'm kind of getting to that point that the research is so clear that there's an element of leadership establishing what's acceptable and required and expected by the adults in the building. So I think it's a combination of the both. That's my experience over the past 14 years. Yes, ma'am. And you know what Rob Horner taught us early on is the adults fall out like the kids. If you do it well from the get-go, 80% of the staff will come on board. And there may be 10% of the staff who needed a little additional support, and there may be 1 to 5% of the staff who need highly individualized support called supervision. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
So So my job today is to just talk with you a little bit about what Illinois is doing differently in high schools. So we're going to state the obvious, which you all know because you're from high schools, but these are the things that we take into consideration in Illinois when we're talking about what we need to do to support school-wide positive behaviors in high schools. So we need to take into account size, right? It's not the same as an elementary of 200 kids when we're dealing with a high school with 2,000 kids, right? We have to take that into account. You know, the expectations of the staff are very different. You know, my husband teaches at the college level, and the expectation at the college level is that you come in and you sit down and you listen to lecture and you behave. But not even in college is it like that anymore. So it's not. He comes home and talks to me about behavior problems in his classes. But one of the things that, you know, we have to kind of work on that issue with our staff, that the expectation is that we want this culture to be positive. We want all kids who come in here to be taught what we expect of them. We can no longer go along with the idea that they should know what they should do, right? They should know how to do this. They're in the 9th grade or they're in the 10th grade, right? We have to really work around that issue with the grown-ups. As you all know, staff is often departmentalized and very isolated from one another. One of the schools that I work with has 1,500 kids, and I know there are staff in that building that don't know one another. So, you know, that's a big issue if you're trying to create a cohesive culture, a positive culture, if people don't know one another and they're not communicating. We know that we need more groundwork done, which helps with buy-in, and in a minute I'm going to talk to you exactly what we're doing to make sure that that groundwork is done. And the teams can be layered. So we know that if we're not paying attention, you can have all different teams. You all could be on 4 different teams working on the same thing and not even know about it, right? In a big school, the teams can really we could work a lot smarter and not so hard if we were communicating about that. And we also know that implementation comes more slowly in high schools. We can't be in a hurry. In fact, at lunch I was talking with a school that's going to begin implementation, a high school that's going to begin implementation next year. And they spent this whole last year planning to implement. So we don't want to be in a hurry to do this. We want to make sure that we roll it out right the first time. So the push to do things in Illinois the push to do things differently in Illinois really came about because the high schools were telling us this has to be different. This has to look different. You don't have to be in a room full of high school people very often when you use elementary examples before you know you shouldn't do that anymore, right? I mean, bad things happen when you do that. So we figured out that we needed to do some things differently. Obviously, as Lucille pointed out, the requests for training with high schools was beginning to increase, and that's okay. And we needed to change the flavor of the training. So here's the thing. You have to be really careful when we're training high schools. We're really careful about this. We know that everybody in the audience thinks they're different from everybody else, but they're really not that different. We sort of go in knowing everybody in this room thinks that their high school is different from this high school, that's different from that high school, and they have no similarities to elementary and middle schools. So we would never say this out loud in a training, but the truth is they're not that different. Really, the concepts are all the same. We just have to tweak the practices. And honestly, if you look at the practices, they're not even that different. One of our big high schools just did a student survey about things that they wanted for acknowledgments. And one of the main things on the survey was stickers. High school kids, Irvin High School. So it's just one of those things that we have to get out of that mindset that we're so different that nothing can work. So one other example I want to give you, I was at a high school meeting, their universal team was meeting, and they were talking about their cell phone problem. So this is Springfield High School, 1,500 kids, not that different to the high school I was comparing them to talk to them about this high school that was putting in tiny little lockers around so they could drop off their cell phones before they went into the school. So I was just sharing this with the team and didn't hear a thing I said. All they heard was, that's not our high school. So that couldn't possibly work here. So we have to make sure we're being mindful of that that's their perception as they come in. So in Illinois, these are the 8 things that we're focusing on, just 8 with high schools, right? We're focusing on readiness, coaching, curriculum, training, TA, high school specific work at conferences, and Tier 2 and Tier 3. So I'm going to break down those really briefly and then pass it over to the principals. So before we would engage in training with a high school, we would do an overview for the administrative staff. I just did one of these yesterday, and we spent all morning in that meeting talking about how rollout could look in their building. Right? They know they're going to have buy-in issues. They know there are some preconceived notions. They know they come from a district with lots of initiatives. So we really spent time planning, thinking through, brainstorming what that readiness needed to look like, or what that implementation needed to look like. So we have an in-district meeting with all of the stakeholders who have decision-making power. We make sure that they've gone through some readiness steps, including things that, like they have appointed an external coach in their district, and each building would have an internal coach. In a high school, especially a big high school, it could be really nice if you have 2 internal coaches. So we talk about that with them and make sure that's in place before we would ever do rollout. We want to make sure that the building has a data management system, like Lucille mentioned Swiss earlier. We want to make sure that the data management system is in place so that they can pull their data to make decisions from. And we need to talk with them about the time commitment it's going to take for them to go through training and for their coaches to go through training. And we need to make sure that then, from the network's perspective, we approve that they're ready to go forth and train. We ask that the universal team, or the building not appoint, that's really the wrong word. That would be the wrong thing to do. We ask for the building to identify a universal team. So unlike the speaker this morning who said she had 82 people apply to be on the team, we don't really have that problem yet, but we do get some really great people coming together to be on a universal team to focus on school culture, to focus on climate, and to focus on really improving what's happening in their building. So we ask for them to identify a team, then we ask them to do a needs assessment with their staff, and then we want them to educate their staff. Somebody else mentioned that earlier this morning, right? You can't just expect grown-ups to know what to do, right? Just like with kids, we have to teach grown-ups what we're expecting with this, and we have to train them around the material and the content. So we can do that with staff by department. You know, it's never my favorite thing to do to stand up in front of an entire staff at a high school, because there's inevitably 4 people reading the paper, 2 people unwrapping their Subway sandwiches in front, right? It's a really hard crowd. If you haven't ever done it before, it's a very hard crowd. So we do tweak that a little bit. We can do that in a lunch sort of format. We can also offer CPDUs. We can have the leadership team present the information. In other words, we go in and we really try to help you figure out what that could look like for your staff. We have the staff watch a video about culture, and we make sure we share our data that we've collected from the self-assessment, right? We wouldn't ever want to collect data and then not give it back. When we think about a universal team in Illinois at a high school, this is what we're really talking about. We're talking about a core team of individuals who are made up with somebody who can, A, be the internal coach, who's sort of in charge of what's happening universally, coordinating what's happening universally, and then somebody on that team who's going to be in charge of how teaching takes place in the building around behavior, somebody who's in charge of how acknowledgments are taking place in the building, how communication with staff and with family and with community members is going to take place, and how we're using data. If you don't do this, what ends up happening is you spend all of your time talking about how to plan a party in your high school. So this breakdown really does take away that and make sure that we're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. There's nothing worse for your buy-in than for people to think PBIS is about parties. So we want to make sure that's taken care of. So we provide technical assistance to the coaching for your district. We have what we call a data audit, where basically we try to get information specific to your building and your district that we can use to make plans around. And then I mentioned earlier the working smarter piece. So in a high school, we would sit down and we would write out every single committee, what you're working on, how it's related to your school improvement goals, who's on it, and then what's the point? And then we can figure out where we could try to work a little smarter. And all the coaches go through coaches training. So in Illinois, we've gone from having a universal curriculum that was good for K-12 to a specific high school curriculum with specific high school examples in it. We did that based on lessons learned, and we've taken information from the National High School Center this year. The new curriculum next year is going to have even more high school specific data in it around academics, around dropout information, all of those pieces that really high schools need to have to fit all of this together. So when we do training, I mentioned this earlier, only high schools are in the room. High school specific curriculum, we have 2 days of training to get started, and then we have a third day that's a follow-up, basically technical assistance day, to tweak anything that needs tweaked or to get any assistance that people need. In addition to going to those 3 trainings, those 3 days of universal training, in Illinois, we offer monthly access to Coaches Network meetings. So if you're a coach in a high school, internal or external, you could monthly go somewhere in your area, drivable, be face-to-face with other high schools and with technical assistance at the table, right? Because we know that that technical assistance is so important. We can't just the train and hope model doesn't work. We also offer go-to meetings. I'm currently offering a go-to meeting once a month around Tier 2 for high schools. So we're really trying to make sure we give people the support they need. With our secondary interventions in high schools, this year we've spent a lot of time focusing on check-in, check-out, and how that can look in a high school and how that can work in a high school. I think by the end of this month, we're going to have some good data to be able to share next year at this time about what we know does work and what we know doesn't work in high schools. And we've been providing phone TA, and we have had a day of TA this year around Tier 2. At Tier 3, we are focusing on, we're spending most of our time right now focusing on wraparound using the Renew application out of New Hampshire. So we just did a 2-day training around that. We have TA calls around that next week, and we have network people going into buildings to help support that work. Whew. All right, it's my speedy talk.
Yeah.
So,
and Amy's point is we're really in a demo process with Tier 2 and Tier 3, where we have about 10 high schools charging forward with Tier 2 and Tier 3 right now, and we're in a learning mode nationally on that. So.
Next, I'm going to introduce Larry Irvin is going to talk about Foreman High School. Larry's getting ready to move to Denver, which we're sad about losing him in Illinois because his high school is one that we really use as a model of how this can work. He's going to talk about engaging staff and students, teaching behavior, and using data.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Just briefly, as intros, we've been doing PBIS, or trying to as best we can, for several years. We started out, in terms of engagement, we started out at a point where we had a false start in our high school. We were having lots of issues, lots of problems, lots of office discipline referrals, lots of violence in the school. And back at that time, faculty was very much like, you fix this. You're the person in charge. You get the big bucks. We tried, but 1 person, 2 people, 7 people can't fix this. We brought in PBIS by name, and we had a false start. The initial response was, that's a program. It's not going to work here. We're different, right? If it didn't work here, so the first question was, where has this been done? Well, elementary back at that time, because that was several years ago. So that was a problem. And, okay, well, what high schools has this been done in like us? Well, none really. We're going to try it. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. We tried. We had a couple team meetings. We had a couple of round robin, ideas sharing, this and that. It didn't go anywhere. Things spiraled out of control. And it really got quite bad, to the point where people didn't want to come to work. People were missing work. Teacher absenteeism was high. Student absenteeism was high. The number of assaults on adults in the building, I think the year we really engaged in this was 53. We brought that down to 1, which is 1 too many within a year. but we went from 53 assaults on adults in our building down to 1. A lot of that has to do with simply how we're interacting with the kids, and it's the adult behaviors that really matter. That's how we engaged our staff, right? It got to a point where people couldn't go on like that anymore. We were losing people. They didn't want to come to work. We hit a critical need. I hope nobody here gets to that point, because I think there are, knowing what I know now, better ways to engage people around that to be more proactive. But that's the course that we had to take. The first thing we did when the faculty came back and said, well, let's try that thing again. Let's try PBIS again. And a small group of teachers came, and they said, but look, we can't call it PBIS, because they're just not going to buy it. We're going to make our own acronym. So we did, because high schools are quirky like that and idiosyncratic. So we called it PAR. It stands for our school-wide behavioral expectations of productive, appropriate, respectful, and responsible. Real common themes in high schools, I think, and schools in general. We certainly, like Lucille mentioned, used our data. The data was pretty compelling. We had over 3,000 office discipline referrals easily in the past several years when we went and looked back. We had lots of assaults on adults in the building, lots of calls for police assistance, lots of fire alarm pulls, all those things that make life in a high school really miserable for the adults and the kids. And we appealed to people's self-interest, the teachers. This will make your life easier if we get this right, because nobody wants to work in a place like that. So we used the data and we identified our top 3, and then we sat down and organized teams, and we came up with a nice plan of how to approach that work. The on-time to class piece was a big move forward for us. Tardiness was an issue. It was the one thing that, even after the violence settled and the assaults settled, the tardiness was still driving everybody crazy. Well, one of the reasons was our teams knew pretty well how to get a handle on the violence pretty quickly, right? Some basic strategies of de-escalating, pre-correction, redirection using a lowest level intervention as possible worked pretty quickly. But this tardy thing we couldn't quite get our hands on. One of the reasons is because the team went around and around and around. It took us about 2 months to figure out our own definition of what it meant to be on time to class. The adults sitting around the table couldn't quite get it together and say, what do we mean by on time to class? Are they on time to class if they do the 100-yard dash and get there? Is that appropriate? Well, they're on time to class. And then back and forth and back and forth. Finally, we settled on a definition after about 2 months of work that, as simple as it seems, was a critical point for us. And our definition for on time to class is the student enters the room appropriately with 100% of his body being across the threshold. That's what we had to come to, right? That's what we had to come to. Everybody agreed on that, or if they didn't quite agree on that, we got to a point where we just said to each other, can we live with this and move forward? That became kind of a mantra. Can we live with this? Can we work with this and move forward? So we did. That was a critical point for us. And we look back on that and laugh about that even today. As we engaged staff in becoming familiar with the lesson plans that our teams have created, there was a diagram up here about a teaching and learning team. As we engaged staff around those direct instruction lesson plans, we had our own teachers model how those lesson plans should be implemented and delivered in the classroom. Modeled the T-charts. Here's what it should look like all the time. Here's what it should never look like. Actually walk through and pretend doing the modeling as if you had a class of teenagers in front of you and practicing that. What it looked like to turn to your class of 14, 15, 16-year-olds and have them actually model this behavior. It gets a little hammy sometimes. But a lot of the teachers came to the point to where they enjoyed those lessons, especially that front loading. And yeah, it got a little silly, but it got the point across. And when you actually ask the kids to pretend that they know how to behave correctly, they do, right? They do, and it sinks in and they get it. And then that's something you can always anchor back to later on in the school year. We also engaged staff in some really critical PD that was around, how to redirect kids appropriately. What we know is standing at the front of the room, yelling at the back of the room doesn't work. It never has. It certainly won't these days. So what else might that look like? And everybody knows, well, proximity. That'll be the first answer you get from teachers. Well, what do you do if a student's acting out? What do you do? Well, proximity. Go over and walk over by them. Well, you go and walk over by them, but that could take any number of different forms. I mean, you can walk over them and still be a big jerk yourself, and it's just going to hack the kid off a little more, and it's going to escalate things. Or you can walk over them and, give them a little tap, probably not on the shoulder. That doesn't always go over so well with high school kids, depending on the relationship people have. So what we told people is just go over and put your hand on the desk and ask the kid, how you doing today? You got 10 minutes in class here left. This is what I need you to do. And I'm going to walk away, and I just want you to get. And if you've got a question, raise your hand. I'll be happy to come back, but you need to get busy. And just to kind of using the lowest level redirection strategy as they could to get the student back on track. Because, what we had found out earlier is we don't have a hammer big enough to scare our kids. They come from much tougher environments than most of us have ever come from, and there's not a hammer big enough. So if the hammer's not going to work, we've got to find something else. I know there are a lot of principals in this room, and it took me several years to learn this, but one thing that I learned is that leadership isn't about implementing stuff, right? It isn't about implementing programs. Leadership is about how you go about working with people through the bumps of implementing the program. You're going to get resistance to this, and I think everybody knows that. I think naively I went in thinking, people voted for this, they're on board, this is going to fly right through. Even with that support, we still encountered resistance. So some of this, and I think this is typical for high schools, I teach content, I don't teach behavior. That's the parent's job. I'm not going to do it. The deans can do it if somebody has to do it here, but I'm not going to do it. I'm an English teacher, I'm a math teacher, I'm etc. Some people said, after a year or more of training, so what you're telling me is I got to give the kid some M&Ms for doing what he's supposed to be doing? Totally missed the point. We had to go back. He was one of our tertiary teachers. So we went back and had some additional conversations. He was our PE teacher, and he came around. He actually ended up doing a nice job with it. But you don't want to leave your faculty with that either. That you're supposed to give M&Ms for kids that are doing something they're supposed to do. It's not the thing itself. It's more about the acknowledgement, whatever that acknowledgement might be, and it doesn't have to be anything tangible. It could be something very intangible that leaves a longer lasting impression. And then some of our teachers very honestly said, look, I don't know how to do this. I can teach math, and I can teach English, and I can teach this and that. I don't know how to teach kids how to behave. And that's where we found out most of our booster sessions for our PD had to go back and revisit, is on the classroom management, on the delivery of the lesson, the modeling, the practicing the acknowledgement, the redirecting, and the pre-corrections. We did this with our teachers. We also did this with our lunchroom staff. Our lunchroom was an interesting place a few years back. And it was what I hope is not so typical a scene anymore, but the adult supervisor's up there sitting in a chair reading a paper, kids eating lunch. If something got really out of hand, the paper'd come down and then go back up, right? What we did is we trained our security on how to do active monitoring. What does that look like? It's not rocket science, but they sure weren't doing it, and they sure weren't being expected to do it. We trained them in giving pre-corrections, and we made sure they had a microphone that worked up in the student lunchroom so that they could give pre-corrections to students about being at your table, not having your hats on, clearing your dishes, clearing your trays when you're done. We also asked them to we put our garbage cans on wheels so that they could roll them up and down the aisles, right? They shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to do that, but you know what? Our lunchroom is clean now, and you don't walk through trash comes the 6th period lunch, right, every day. And it takes but a minute. They get 46 minutes for lunch. We give them about 20, 25 minutes to eat, and then they do the garbage can walk-arounds, the pre-corrections on the microphone. It happens like clockwork every single period. And our lunchrooms are calm. Knock on wood. Haven't had a food fight or any kind of big disruption yet this year, and that's a big change for us. In terms of, am I heading in the right direction here? Okay, all right. We talked about the teaching of the behavior already, and that process of, you know, for us, some teachers were genuinely, legitimately intimidated by having to do this. They didn't know how to do this. So making sure you've got a good plan in place for modeling what that looks like for teachers, that was very helpful for us, and that's what we found we had to go back to and revisit, because people fall back into old routines, fall out of the new routines. So boosters for the teachers for that as well. You know, in terms of results, and like I said, it's been a few years, but we went from literally thousands of office discipline referrals a year to where we've been turning in just under 1,000 for the last few years, which is still a lot, admittedly. But it's a lot better than 3 and 4 times that many. The assaults, like I said, went from 53 in that 1 year. I don't know that, knock on wood, that we've had an assault this year on an adult in the building. That's a nice change to have for faculty and staff. Freshmen on track rates, you know, when the classrooms are more calm, when they're not so chaotic, the kids do more learning. They actually learn, they get smarter. Our freshman on track rate went from 45% to we're over 70% right now, which still isn't great, but it's significantly better, I think. The dropout rate has gone from 10.8% to below 5%. And then our graduation rate, works for all grade levels also, has gone from 53% to 77%. And we're looking to hopefully break 80 this year. We'll see. That'll be a big jump. That's a stretch goal. But that what Lucille had said previously is you get the dividends back in terms of student engagement, student learning, student progress when you're not constantly fighting those battles and putting out all the little fires, and when you can be more proactive with that. So that's been our experience.
What you hear from Larry, if you're a PBIS trainer, what always is interesting to me, he's using words like prompts and pre-corrects and teaching and active supervision, but you're hearing it from how a principal dialogues with it within the building. The other thing you're hearing him say, PBIS talk, training talk, boosters. You can't just do one staff development on how to give reinforcement and teach behavior and then say, have a good year. It is an ongoing prompts, ongoing message, ongoing strategizing, and the willingness of the leadership to invest in constantly reviewing the data and revising. So, you know, that's what I hear when I listen to a principal like Larry talk. It doesn't happen overnight, and it requires constant attention, especially in a high school. So where is Dave?
I'm right here.
Dave Smiley from Elgin High School, and Elgin is over by Madison, Wisconsin versus Chicago, which is over by, you know, Michigan and Indiana for those of you.
Elgin is the second largest district in the state of Chicago. Just so you know a little bit about us, we're 2,700 or 2,400. We're 139 years old, one of the oldest comprehensive high schools in the state of Illinois. Demographically, a lot of similarities to Foreman. I want to make sure I answer your question, because that's important. I really want to hit the leadership part of this. Larry may agree or disagree. It's all about philosophy. Everybody involved in Elgin High in Universal or Tier 2 was handpicked by me, because you need teacher leaders who are resilient and tough and will get through the hard days and bounce back. Even when they're crying, they can come back and continue on. We've had some really, really difficult days with the reticent ones in social studies. Why is that? What's wrong with social studies teachers? That they're just not, I'm sorry, I apologize. They're just reluctant. Again, it's This is more elementary. This is not something we can do at the high school level. That is not true. The status quo does not work any longer. It does not work. If you can't change behavior, how are your test scores ever going to change? They told me last week, we just took the ACT, those of you from Illinois or Michigan, the states that take the beautiful ACT test. We had 100% attendance rate both days in a very at-risk high school. They all showed up. They all listened. They realized the magnitude of what we were talking about, and they came. That's important. Now we'll see the results in August. PBIS is like a garden. You have to tend to it every day. The schools that I'm aware of that struggle, and I'm talking solely high school, the principal is not there lockstep with the teams. I'm not talking about leading every day. I don't do that, but I'm there. The teachers see me, my administrative team, which was also handpicked. There are 3 of us. My strongest AP and one of my division heads, handpicked by me because I knew they could help sustain this. It's about sustainability. I got a stomachache today because they're planning for next year and I'm not even going to be there, but I'm not with them today. So I hope it's a productive day for them, and I believe it will be. But you've got to be right with them, working every day. What are we talking about today? I will tell you, data at the high school level, how much of a challenge is that? How many times did they give you things or give teachers things? Oh, here's your 150 kids, take a peek. And it's just not usable. Swiss is the greatest thing I've come across in 36 years. If I ask for something, I have it instantly, and all right, tardies are a problem. We're not wearing our IDs. We're not doing this instantly. We can make a lesson. We can work on it a day later, 2 days later. Swiss is awesome. It's awesome. So when you get involved, certainly make that commitment, because without it, you'll struggle. Backtracking a little bit, one of the things that our district has seen, this started with the superintendent. He came from Chicago, was an assistant sup in Chicago, came to Elgin. He is all about PBIS. He talks it, he lives it, he breathes it. I think we're somewhere around 30 of our 40 elementary schools are PBIS schools, something like that. 2 of our high schools, I think 7 of our 8 middle schools are PBIS schools. So if it starts at the top with him and the board, it's a little harder for teachers to go, well, you know, I'm really not buying into this. Because I've met with all of them, all those social studies people. The train's coming. The train's coming. You either get on or we're going to go over you, because this is what we're doing. We had an 84% vote when we voted in 08, and this is the direction we're going. Back to that initial training and some of the orientation for staff, we got very fortunate, and I thank Lucille for this. The person from the Illinois PBIS network that initially talked to my staff was a former high school principal. And he came from a high school very similar to us. He had instant credibility. Don't bring someone in to talk to your staff, no disrespect, that is an elementary person. They're not hearing it. Or a middle school person. It's not the same. But when we're talking to them with people who have lived the lives we live, that credibility piece is going to move you along in a hurry. We went from 2 presentations by this gentleman, who I call a dear friend. We were about 84, 85% on our vote. But again, it's about leadership. It truly is. It's about those people you put in those important places. We had one staff meeting where I'll never forget this. I was with the superintendent and not there. We had a huge PBIS presentation. They got killed. My phone was ringing. He thought something happened at school. Oh, my Lord, something bad's happened. No, we just had a meeting. And it went horribly. The next day, we had crying. These were men. We had crying. We had it all. But you know what? A day later, they came back. Dave, this is what we want to do next time. This is how we're going to do it. Will you stand behind us when we present this? But this is how we're going to do it. So it's really about those key people that you put in those leadership positions. Talked a little bit about data. The other things kind of lockstep with what Larry talked about. I know we want to take some time for questions. Teaching the adults, and everybody's touched on that, but that's really a key thing too. You've heard it over and over. This is about adult behavior. And it really cuts to respect. What do teachers tell you all the time? Well, I want to be respected. So do the kids. I don't know a kid in my place, if you don't, no matter what's happened, if you're respectful to him, well, yeah, you know, I really screwed up. I really screwed up. This is what has to happen here. This is what we're going to do. So teach those lessons hard. Kids will respond. We've started check-in, check-out, and then I'll stop. Who knows what check-in, check-out is? Okay, that's where you lock up, I use that word, kids with adults. Okay? My secretary is the most beautiful woman I've ever known. She has been with 4 principals at Elgin High, 30 years in the system as the principal's secretary. She wants to take part in check-in, check-out. My assistant principal takes 5 kids, lines them up. I walk in. 5 hardest kids in the place are with Susan Fortner. She's older. I'm going, Aldo, these are hard cases. Hard case kids that you put with her, going to check in before school, check in after school, show their grade report. Those 5 kids are there every day. I'm not even sure they go to class. But they are with her. They have made a connection to an adult at Elgin High School that they didn't have. Now, are the numbers dramatic? Maybe not what anybody, what everybody would like to see, but you know what? Small victories. Revel in those small victories. People get depressed, oh my God, you know, the numbers haven't turned around, we still got 70,000 tardies, or whatever it might be. Small victories. When you see gains, or when you see growth, or when you see connections like that, I see these kids all the time now hovering around the adults in the main office. We made all the secretaries check-in, check-out people. There's kids in there all the time. It's like second mom. That's a beautiful thing because those kids were struggling freshmen that were not connected. So look for those small victories too. Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
Yes.
When you plan for lessons that you want to deliver to the kids, I'm suspecting that takes place at the beginning of the school year.
We have done them periodically. We actually had a couple that didn't go well and retaught them because that was a great idea, and we did use it about having teachers teach. At a staff meeting, have the teachers teach the lesson so the others can see it. Then we'll go out and do it a day or so later.
I was just wondering in terms of time frame, like spend the first week just going over.
We do a lot of orientation in grade level meetings. We pull all the freshmen in together, juniors, seniors, that type of thing. But then we taught them second hour, we determined we're going to teach this lesson in every classroom second period. And then pre-teach it, work on the presentation before we do it.
I'm wondering between the two of you gentlemen if there's access to us to be able to view those lesson plans that you guys have developed. It'd be nice to see some models of that as we're trying to do that now, actually.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Our email addresses are in the booklet. Well, Larry's leaving, so you can email me and I'll find Larry. Yes, sir.
Regarding data collection, you mentioned Swiss.
Yes.
Are there any other districts using something other than Swiss like Skyward?
I'll let Lucille.
Amy can answer that.
I do have high schools that use Skyward, and they can get to that data. It's just very time-consuming in comparison to getting the data off of Swiss. Gathering the types of data that we look at when we're a PBIS school, like number of office discipline referrals per day per month, or office discipline, the location of office discipline referrals. So those types of pieces of data you can get off of Skyward. They're just time-consuming to pull. I have high schools who have found somebody in their building to do the double entry. So it's worked out. Actually, I have a school that somebody who was manning the in-house room does all the double entry.
What about Infinite Campus? Does that go back and forth?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to determine why is it difficult to pull from Skyward data information?
You got to think of it this way. Swiss was designed for daily decision-making at the building level. Something like Skyward was designed for district-level reporting. So if you think about the purpose of the design, you know, that's the problem. So we have the big 7. You want your data by time of day, by location, by behavior, by kid, and then by per day, per month, and then by ethnicity and disability. And so if you look at Swiss.org as a demo and you have your data people in your system, in your district look at it, what you need to focus on that our principals are really needing is data that's useful on a daily basis in the building with those 7 graphs. We hate to say that, but for right now you should, but you should talk with your district data decision makers, your superintendent, about the value of data is for daily decision making at the building level, and can we make adaptations or switch to Swiss or change our system so that it's useful daily at the building level. Just keep that as your mantra. But it may take some double data entry. Okay, so the question is, what's the difference between the middle school and the high school, or how to move from middle school to high school?
No, just examples of boosters that high school kids buy into.
Okay, so boosters are, the question is about boosters that high school kids would buy into. Let me just clarify what a booster is. A booster means you've already taught the lessons based on your 3 to 5 expectations, and boosters are just repeated practice sessions. So a booster is directly connected to your original instruction. So a booster for high school could be, for example, once you've had an assembly maybe, or in all the homerooms, people have practiced what is on time to class. A booster could be, and I saw a great one on YouTube, I don't know how to get onto YouTube, but somebody showed it to me, of kids made a video about why they need to be on time to class, and quite frankly it was hysterical, but it was well done, about all the things the kid could have done along the way to delay him from going to class. It came out of one of our Wisconsin schools, and it was a good booster because they'd already made their decision, they'd already taught it, but having kids involved in making the lessons more creative is one suggestion that I've heard from high schools a lot, is use the kids, especially for your boosters. I think, I don't know if it was Larry or Dave talked about using the kids even in the lessons where they practice. Don't let the kids practice much what you don't want. Let the adults demonstrate the what's not responsibility. Don't let the kids do that. But let the kids be involved in showing different ways of how the behavior can come about. They'll be more creative sometimes than we will. So boosters are a repeat of a lesson for additional practice, just like when you teach a major lesson in social studies and you teach what democracy is as your major lesson, your boosters could be examples and quick practices and differentiation. Differentiation is good for boosters too. What is democracy? What is not democracy? What is respect? What is not respect? Just don't let them practice what is not respect in a booster, but you can let them tell you what it would not look like. Any other examples that you guys want to share in terms of boosters for high school?
We've let our students make the visual aids that we post up around the building. They're far more creative than the adults were. You know, we put nice, neat signs typed up in Arial font. They added some very interesting pictures, and they put themselves in there, transposed, and it's much more attention grabbing. So when we do a booster, we will ask for some additional visuals to go up in the school, and we will engage a student team in putting those visuals together to post around the building.
Somebody did a staff booster that I heard about based on the quiz game Jeopardy. PBIS or not PBIS, and they had different staff responses, and they did it as a professional development booster in a high school. And, you know, the high school level, again, you know, there's this notion of we always say this, high school, whether it's the teachers or the kids, you got to be cool. You know, middle school, you don't really have to be cool. The kids think they're cool, but they're not all that cool. When you get to high school, the cool factor is huge. So with the boosters, if you involve the kids and you think of the cool factor and the engagement factor for the adults so that they can still think about music or science or social studies, that boosters are quick, boosters are simple, boosters are repeat of lessons that have already been agreed on and laid out. And variation, I like the idea of the artwork, variation of who teaches it, more differentiation is always good for boosters. I think yes, ma'am. Cool tools? Yep. Cool tools is just a shorthand term we all use in Illinois to refer to lesson plans. And if you look in on the national PBIS.org website, the question was about cool tools for high school. There's examples. There's a high school monograph. And then we also have plenty of them on our website. Or you could, if you go in the Illinois website and you don't find enough, send an email where it says contact us and say send us more high school cool tools and we'll send them to you. You're asking about the procedures for an office discipline referral for discipline reasons? Okay, so your question is, what is the procedure for when a kid gets an office discipline referral in the high school? Do they actually take it and walk to the office, or is the adult who gave it responsible for documentation? Is that your question?
So I don't know if this is the answer to your question, but one of the issues we had to overcome was this idea that an office discipline referral was a hall pass. The office discipline referral is not a hall pass. There may be appropriate times when the student needs to be removed from the classroom, and when that happens, we will call security, and that will be done. The student will be brought down. Otherwise, write the student up and give it to the dean at the end of the day or on your next prep period, and the dean will make the arrangements to call. Otherwise, your deans are swamped with kids with hall passes that are otherwise minor infractions that should have been dealt with in the classroom and de-escalated.
So this is the difference between what we call a major and a minor. And the minors are saved up by the teacher and given in for data input at the end of the day. You could have a system where the teachers input it. I don't know how that would work in Swiss in a high school. But the idea is to differentiate, it's part of the PBIS training, between majors and minors. And so that, and one of the issues is, are teachers going to be motivated to document something that doesn't remove the kid from their class, right? That will be the next question that comes up. And the answer is, if that data is used to initiate lessons, cool tools, and procedures to drop the frequency of that annoying behavior, then the teachers are going to be willing to document it if they know it's going to be used by a team and strategies are going to come from it. If they think it goes into Never Never Land and they don't get any strategies back or any data back, they won't be willing to document without giving the kid a ticket to the hall.
Skyward and Swiss are supposed to be able to sync, but I can tell you I don't have any high schools that do that. They double enter because it's messy and it's not a smooth sync. So they double enter. At Foreman, you have somebody on staff who does the double entry, right?
Yes.
Is that what am I getting the question right?
Right. Entering from Skyward to Swiss or entering from a paper referral?
They're entering from paper referral?
They enter from a paper referral. It's a member of our PBIS data team who does that.
We hired someone who's actually hired two of our grads from last year who are in community college who come in 2 days a week and enter our data. We pay them out of pop money, however we have to pay them, but well worth it. Can I make, Lucille?
Sure, go ahead, Dave. Talking to the mic because they're recording.
My young man right here inspired me, and this is common sense, but we didn't do it. Since you're in early discussions, a lot of you, make sure your middle schools or junior highs are on board your feeders. We're in a situation where we have one which is a great PBIS school, the other is not. Can you imagine if all 700 of your freshmen walk in from a PBIS middle school or junior high? Are you kidding me? We've got 13 elementaries, same thing. If those kids moving into middle school, we're working on it now. In fact, one of my guys got promoted and will be the new principal at the other middle school. He'll get it done, but that will make your job so much easier because you walk in the first day, you start talking the talk and the language, they're with you. So we didn't do that right. I know you will.
Okay, so the question is, how does PBIS training, professional development, handle the mindset of that? Can you say it the way you said it again? Yes, the students need to be accountable. Okay, so we are holding the students accountable, but we're first cleaning up our house as adults. So in terms of setting clear, predictable expectations and teaching it and promoting it, is necessary. So for example, I always like to use the tardy example at high school because it's so real for everybody. And when you use the example with, you know, like I did earlier, some teachers, the kid's got to have his rear end in the chair. The other teacher, they've got to be in the door. And the third teacher, you got to be in the chair on Monday, in the door on Tuesday, and in the hallway. You know, I'll go out and haul you in by Friday. What does that tell the kids? That tells the kids there really isn't a consistent, clear rule. So you can't hold people accountable unless we have created a social culture with predictability, consistency, and respect. And so we do hold them accountable, but first we have to clean up what the expectations are and how we're going to promote and encourage. We also, with the acknowledgement system, it's a big issue at the high schools, and our principals here brought that up in terms of people thinking kids should just behave. We have a lot of research that shows, first of all, there's no research that shows providing consistent positive reinforcement is harmful in any way. Okay? There's nothing that shows that. And there's also studies like a big, huge Gallup poll about what makes for good employers, something with billions of people in the survey. It's about being constantly recognized. And then we also remind people, would you be here today if you weren't getting a paycheck? I'm not so sure. So, you know, there's plenty of opportunity for that. Yes, sir.
After Christmas break and spring break, do you go back into implementation?
Okay, the question is, after people have been hanging out in their neighborhoods for a while without the same expectations like Christmas break and spring break, those are opportunities for boosters. We always do planned boosters or recommend planned boosters at times when you expect kids to need more, and it's about the adults. So if you look at your November referrals, from one year to the next year, and you can see they spike before Christmas, then you do your boosters before Christmas. If you see they spike after Christmas, this is how you use your data, and you use your boosters. That's an excellent example. Yes?
So we talked about incentives. We know what it looks like in middle school with stores. For high schools, what are you doing?
Okay, and when we talk about incentives, I want to just clarify before we get some examples. What we do is we're using the science of behavior change. And in the science of behavior change, we deliver reinforcement in scheduled manners, and we have multiple tiers: high frequency, intermittent, and celebratory, and we planfully move around in a schedule of reinforcement so that we don't keep at the same level for everything. We use high frequency for some things, we use intermittent for others, and part of celebratory is when you can actually save and get something from the school store, like pencils, paper, notebooks. Kids, they do, if you save things, you can get into a dance that's held. You can get a cut rate price at a basketball game, okay? So, but there's a variety, and it's scientifically planned, and it's used in a manner of the science of behavior change. Any examples that you guys want to give of acknowledgments?
We have one person on the Universal team that is a former coach who is our, I'll use the word, solicitor. She's out in the community all the time. We've got a major celebration on Friday. We've got 500 kids coming. They're telling me we got iPods, we got all kinds of things that she went out and got donated. And we're not in a great area on the east side of Elgin, but business owners are all about it. Oh, kids change, you know, kids acting better, and yeah, we can support that. So we've had all kinds of things donated. Pizza coupons and movie coupons and anything you can imagine. You just got to get somebody out there working in your community. You'll be surprised, pleasantly surprised. Under 2 discipline referrals for the year.
So it's a celebration.
Yes.
At the end of the year, which would be part of a plan that you see throughout the year.
Yes, sir.
Before we take the next question, I was just at a high school Friday that did a celebration for high school kids because they reduced their tardies as a whole school. They reduced their tardies by a certain percentage, and they did pumpkin carving, and it was great.
May?
No, it was in October.
Okay. Okay, we're getting close to the end, so maybe we'll take one more question. Yeah. Sorry, I had to ask the obvious, okay? I think we had one here, so maybe we'll take 2 more. Okay, go ahead. He's passing on to you. Yes? Okay, use of data and dissecting it. I love that word. I always say peeling back the layers of the data. Looking deeper and telling the story is a constant professional development activity, and we encourage that all faculty meetings, all communications with family have some element of data in them. But yes, also department meetings, teaching teachers how to use data, but teaching them how to tell the story behind the data is absolutely a critical part of the professional development. Sir, would you like to ask the last question here? Did you have another one? You're good. Okay, all right. Go ahead. They're pointing at you as someone who hasn't spoken yet. Okay, I'm sorry.
This is for Amy, actually, and you were talking about here with the PBIS network.
Yes. Yeah. That would be a Lucille question. She's my boss.
Okay, the Illinois PBIS network is funded by the Illinois State Board of Education using Part B IDEA discretionary funds under the concept of if we improve the social climate in our school and get behavioral practices in place for everybody, our most vulnerable populations will do better, including our kids with disability and our kids that are often targeted for excessive exclusion by ethnicity. Ethnicity and disability are the kids who get bounced out the fastest and lose access. Therefore, our state uses, as many states do, their IDEA discretionary Part B dollars to change the social climate and the overall outcomes for kids. If the school is preventive in nature, our most vulnerable kids will do better. So that's how we do it in Illinois. School improvement dollars in many states are used. Title dollars are used. We've had some, over the years, we've had some mental health money in Illinois support our network. So we have a statewide network funded by the state, as do about 40-plus other states. Does that help? That's actually a very good question to end on. So we want to thank you all for your attention, and I want a big thank you to our principals who have a lot going on in their buildings, but they came here today. And Amy, for sure, will be around the rest of today and tomorrow learning with all of you. I've got to get back to another meeting, so watch for Amy if you have more questions or email us. Thank you very much.